My name's Dennis Callahan. I'm a client director with a head. And I'm just going to say a few words about who we are. And then I'm going to turn it over to Liam Schneider from Ahead, who's a cybersecurity specialist focused on cloud. And so I really want you to hear from him. He has a lot of great information. He'll speak for, call it 20 minutes or so. And then he's going to turn it over to American Axle, and so I'm really excited to have American Axle joining us. They're a great customer of ours, great partner of ours. They're doing some really exciting stuff in the cloud, and so I'll defer most of the time to them. But I did want to kind of tell you a little bit about who Ahead is and who I am. So as I mentioned, I'm a client director. I'm based in Southeast Michigan. Uh, Ahead is headquartered out of Chicago. And so I've been here for about 7 years. Prior to that, I worked for EMC, pre Dell acquisition, where I was a district manager. And so it was kind of a leap of faith joining Ahead. At the time, Ahead had maybe about 100 employees. We were probably doing about 200 million in annual revenue. So fast forward to today, and it's quite a bit different, right? So in those 7 years, we're now doing 2.2 billion in annual revenue. We have over 1,300 employees nationally. Our service business alone is over 200 million. And so it's been a great ride. It's been a tremendous amount of growth. What's not reflected here is that we've made 7 acquisitions in the past 24 months. So it's been an extremely busy time for us. But basically, what Ahead does, I mean, we're focused on solving complex challenges within the large enterprise space and really focused on driving IT transformation and IT modernization for our customers. We think we're pretty unique in the marketplace. Where do we fit in? We have, if you look on the far right, you have your consultants out there in the ecosystem, sort of your PWCs and your KPMGs, very slanted and heavy on the strategy side of the equation. Then you tend to have resellers who are a little bit more transactional in nature. And we really feel like we fit nicely in the middle where we can help organizations from a strategy standpoint through acquisition and ultimately from a solutioning standpoint. As I mentioned, we're focused on addressing enterprise complexity. We work across all the major verticals. I show this just to point out some of the type of organizations that we deal with. I didn't want to throw up a logo slide, but we deal with a lot of the large healthcare providers in the US, 5 of the top 10 insurance carriers in the US, 18 of the top financial service providers we call customers. We do quite a bit in public sector. Manufacturing, of course, because we got American Axle on the call today. Do a lot in the manufacturing space and certainly retail. But kind of the 5 areas for us that we go to market with is helping organizations build modern applications, helping organizations leverage their data and drive value out of their data, and obviously, top of mind for this audience, securing the enterprise. We do a tremendous amount in terms of automation, and then enterprise cloud, which for us is a combination of on-premise, modernizing the on-prem infrastructure, and certainly taking advantage of public cloud wherever possible and wherever it makes sense. This is just a drill down on some of those areas in greater depth. And then when it does come to security, and I know that's top of mind, where Ahead plays, ransomware, data breach protection, zero trust networking, cloud security, which is what we're going to be talking about today, and identity governance. So if any of that is top of mind for you, and I imagine it is, certainly feel free to reach out. We'd love to have an offline conversation. That's all I want to say today. I probably took too much time, but right now I'm going to turn it over to Liam to introduce himself, cover some content in the cloud cybersecurity space, and then he's going to transition to American Axle for what they're doing on their journey. So, Liam, I'm going to stop sharing.
my slides up. Can you guys hear and see me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
All right, can you see that I have shared my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Liam Schneider, Principal Specialist Sales Engineer here at Ahead as a part of the cybersecurity team. I've got 27 years of IT experience. I've earned every single one of these gray hairs throughout that time. 17 of those years was spent in healthcare IT. That's where I got the majority of that gray hair. For the vast majority of those 27 years, I've been very focused on information security, but I've been in pretty much every element of IT, from building data centers, building entire security programs, building entire IT management programs, to systems engineering, and of course, my passion is information security. Recently, I came from AWS. I was the practice manager of the Northwest for security risk and compliance in the professional services delivery team. Very fun company to work for, wonderful team there, had a blast. Today, we're going to talk about cloud cybersecurity. Here's what we have on the agenda for the discussion. We'll talk about identity being the new perimeter. We'll talk about the defense in depth approach for cloud workload security. In that, subtopics will be identity and access management, detection and alerting, infrastructure security, data protection, and incident response. And then I'll close out talking about the 7 common tactics, techniques, and procedures that folks use to attack us all the time. Let's get started by talking about the new perimeter, identity. To illustrate, let's talk about the new perimeter and the old perimeter. The traditional security perimeter in our on-premise data center infrastructure typically consisted of firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention systems, spam filters, DLP or data loss prevention systems, etc. And these were used to keep out attackers from our data center assets. But today, this is not sufficient anymore. Gartner forecasts a 22% increase in worldwide spending in public cloud services as business adoption of the cloud grows. Employees and contractors are accessing corporate applications from anywhere and from any device. And so the cybersecurity program has been forced to change and adapt to from securing the on-premise infrastructure to securing off-premise infrastructure accessed from any internet connection globally from any device. Since identity is the gateway into controlling the cloud environment, and all the traditional perimeter devices are managed by this mechanism, identity is now the new perimeter and therefore has to be secured appropriately. In general, while we examine the security of the new perimeter first, IAM security only provides one of the foundational aspects of overall information security. We have to take a defense in depth approach, a multi-layered approach, in order to ensure workloads, and more importantly, our data, are safe, adequately protected in the cloud. Each of the elements in this section are part of minimum security baseline, and each of them should be given time to consider, design, and implement in the cloud environment. For brevity, let's go through these security best practices together at a high level in this multi-layered approach to cybersecurity in the cloud. We need to set up our IAM security so that it works at scale in the cloud to control system access properly. Here are many of the security best practices for IAM. We need to take a look at the federation of identity information so that it's integrated with the appropriate corporate identity source using an identity provider. We need to identify roles relating to managing and using the cloud environment, permissions for those roles, and the mapping of these roles to people. There may also be consideration to using attribute-based access controls, perhaps incorporating a resource tagging strategy into this, and also considerations for service accounts. We need to ensure our password policies support the necessary complexity and other attributes to reduce the chance of being cracked. We need to enable multi-factor authentication to help prevent the consequences of credential stealing. We need to be sure we have proper process around the provisioning and the deprovisioning of identities, and also auditing the access that we've granted and revoked over time to ensure that it's kept up to date. We need to manage our identity secrets like access keys and service credentials to securely store and access them as we need to, and we also need to ensure that they're rotated regularly. We need to address our multi-account strategies so that as organizations grow and create more and more cloud accounts in the environment, that they have the appropriate standard safeguards applied to them. This is also a good time to decide on resources and account tagging standards if they have not already been addressed. We need to be sure we document the appropriate contact information, such as administrators, security team, and billing contacts, so that in the case of a security event, the appropriate people are contacted. IAM has many preventative controls, and detective controls are also very important to secure the environment properly in the cloud. Using detective controls, we gain the visibility required into the cloud environment and build a foundation for automation. To do this, we need to enable logging everywhere for cloud services, compute instances, and network traffic. We then need to also centralize these logs to help make things simpler when a security event is being investigated. We need to use a tool to analyze and correlate logs, such as a SIM or a SOAR tool, to find indicators of compromise that need to be addressed and alerted upon. We need to set retention policies on these logs so that they adhere to compliance and legal requirements. We also need to enable threat detection tools, whether they're native, such as AWS Guard Duty, AWS Trusted Advisor, AWS CloudWatch, or also called Event Bridge, now custom Lambdas, or third-party tools, maybe Palo Alto Prisma Cloud. But we need to enable these and be sure to include alerts on abnormal billing activity as well. This could also be an indication of compromise. Sometimes that's the only one. Asset inventory is very key to ensuring that we are looking at all our cloud assets in the environment. The monitoring of configuration changes so that we can be alerted when unexpected changes happen is very important. Examples of this are AWS config and config rules, but there are other tools too. As we look at IAM access and the logs of our resources, let's also be sure we're examining the base infrastructure security. We need to ensure the appropriate network segmentation is set up using the virtual network subnets, IP site ranges, routing rules, network ACLs, and host ACLs that all support the application tiering architecture and application dependency mappings. We need to enable compute instance security with image lifecycle management, patching, and vulnerability identification or remediation, as well as endpoint detection and response for virtual machines and containers. On top of compute and container instance security, serverless technologies are being used more these days. And so we must protect cloud functions and storage so that they're not exposed publicly and only authorized services and users have access to them. Our web applications have common vulnerabilities, and these need to be addressed. For example, those listed in the OWASP top 10, like SQL injection. And while it is best if during the development and testing cycles that these are mitigated, web application firewalls are an essential component to help reduce the chance that a vulnerability in this regard will be exploited. The cloud providers' global infrastructure help with DDoS protections. The highly available cloud services, such as content delivery networks, load balancers, WAFs, those can all be added to our designs to further help address DDoS attacks, and we should. We also need to consider the different levels of DDoS protection that cloud providers offer, which typically consists of a free tier and a paid tier. Where the paid tier offers much more protections and guarantees that should be looked at to see if they may help to ensure we are fully covered from DDoS vulnerabilities. Examples here, AWS Shield Advanced allows things like cost protection. So if you end up doing auto scaling in order to use that as a strategy for DDoS mitigation, you're not having to pay a massive bill because somebody DDoSed you. Another foundational security element is data protection. We need to require encryption for data at rest, data in flight, and data in use. As a part of this, we must manage the encryption key lifecycle and their rotation. We also need to ensure we restrict access to alter and use these keys. For data in flight, we need to manage our HTTPS or TLS certificate lifecycles and the renewal operations. We need to ensure we have the proper backups and recovery in place. We need to make sure that we have disaster recovery plans that support the recovery point objective and the recovery time objectives in alignment with business continuity plans. We need to test these plans to be sure they work when needed. All of this that I've talked about leads up to the incident response part of the cybersecurity program, where we need to be able to respond swiftly to security events. In incident response, we need to define the process to manage security events. Examples of this could be pickerel, where we have the preparation, then investigation, then containment, then eradication, then recovery, and then lessons learned at the end. Or maybe it's NIST incident response process, where we start with preparation, go into detection and analysis, then we go to containment, eradication, and recovery, and then into post-incident activity. We need to conduct periodic security incident response scenario tabletop exercises to test and improve our processes. As a part of this, we need to also ensure the incident responders have the proper training and that they know how to perform investigations, containment, and eradication operations in the cloud. We need to automate security operations, such as gathering of evidence, containment of appropriate cloud resources, and other security operations to improve response times and effectiveness. We need to understand that cybersecurity is not disaster recovery, and that it is important to have a cyber recovery plan to protect and access known good backups in cases like ransomware that we need to recover from. This also may be required for cyber insurance programs. Lastly, we need to consider the fact that security is not a product, it's a process that is cyclical. The security landscape changes all the time, and so the security program must evolve. The IR team is a critical part of gathering requirements for improving security. So let's now talk about what tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, we're protecting against. Knowing this information helps us better protect our cloud environment. According to the latest data breach investigation report done by Verizon, where over 4,000 breaches were analyzed, 7 TTPs were identified as being used in over 99% of them. The use of email phishing attacks, the exploiting a vulnerable application or device, the installation of command and control software, the capturing of credentials or stealing passwords, the lateral movement in the environment once they're in, moving around, access and authentication to data, and resulting in data exfiltration and ransomware. So at AHEAD, we look at security organizations and their ability to guard against each of these TTPs. It's one of the things that we do. AHEAD developed this table that's on the screen to identify the organization's cybersecurity program maturity level as related to each of the TTPs. For example, endpoint protection, a lightly mature level 1 would just have some anti-malware, whereas maturity level 4 would have a full-on managed EDR solution at the other end of the spectrum. Or when we talk about data loss, immutable backups would be considered maturity level 1, and on the total other side of the spectrum, maturity level 4, you'd have a multi-channel DLP with monitoring and kill switches. You have an air-gapped backup with analytics. And then, of course, we work with a ton of different vendors for various different solutions to kind of plug into these areas, as well as just some other procedural stuff that we like to work with our customers. So in summary, well, what did we talk about today? We've talked about the new perimeter and the traditional perimeter. We talked about the fact that we need a defense in depth approach to cloud security. Inside this defense in depth approach, we have identity and access management considerations, we have detection and alerting considerations, we have infrastructure security considerations, data protection considerations, and incident response considerations. All of those that I went through are considered minimum security baseline. They are security best practice. Then we talked about why we're doing all this. What are we actually defending against? Well, that's where the 7 tactics, techniques, and procedures came in. As far as the call to action and next steps, I suggest that we learn more about each of these cloud security best practices. I went over them at a really high level. I'd love to have more conversation with you so I can help you actually apply what you've learned to do in the cloud. I'd love to have that conversation. Let's keep that conversation going. Feel free to reach out to me. Happy to help, happy to have some conversation with you. Really happy to be here, and I want to thank you for listening to me drone on about cloud security. My email address is on the screen here. Feel free to jot it down. And as of this, I want to open it up to any questions. I think I got a couple more minutes before I start chewing into American Axle's time. So figure maybe a couple questions if anybody has them.
Thanks, Liam. Yeah, one question did get thrown into the chat regarding the maturity model, and is that mapped back to any frameworks?
ISO 33004, and we really like to map everything back to NIST's cybersecurity framework.
Perfect. Appreciate that.
Any
So
other
thinking about the next steps and what you called out there and kind of looking at the maturity, what's your recommendation kind of as a first step for organizations to understand where they sit in the maturity model?
That's a loaded question. The NIST framework does kind of provide this guidance for general maturity with respect to just the CSF. With respect to what I showed earlier, when we talked about the 7 TTPs and the maturity levels there, we've developed this table specifically to just show this is what, from our experience, we see as far as the spectrum from low maturity to high maturity. for the TTPs. But there's no framework out there like this. This was some IP we developed.
Perfect. As we continue to look at the model, another question came in the chat. In the bottom right, can you go into a little further on what it looks like in a cloud environment for the air gap backup?
So it really depends on the situation. For the most part, what you want is you want to make sure that there is no network connection that a piece of malware could traverse. What just to give you an idea of kind of what some holes that have been exploited or can be exploited is going to be some disk array. So this problem came up because we moved from tape primarily over to disk-based backups, right? That was what happened. And whereas you could take a tape, put it inside of a case, give it to Iron Mountain, done. It's not going to be exposed to the ransomware. But now that we've got backups going into like data domains and isolons and object-based storage, the attackers have become very well versed in being able to research these devices to figure out how to mount them. Maybe it's through NFS or something else. And once they do that, they're able to then infect those backups. And that's when we run into trouble. So when we talk about an air gap network in the cloud, we just want to make sure that we're looking at all of those network entry points and make sure there's nothing that can go in through those typical mechanisms. Some great successes have been with products like Rubrik, and they use an API approach to get everything into their backup devices, such that there's not really this network path that's exposed to that environment. But some other solutions that are out there, and I'm not going to name names, they sometimes have to open up this network connection to create this backup, which if you're backing up a massive amount of information, that takes a long time to traverse that network. So it's open, and then it stays up for hours and hours, now sometimes 12 hours, depending upon the size of the backup. And then it closes to air gap it. But during that 12 hours, guess what? It's totally vulnerable. And that's, again, another vector that ransomware gets into.
That's great insight on that. I appreciate that. Kind of double clicking into the vendor portion of it. What's your thoughts on native AWS tools for security versus going to some of the outside solutions? And I know that's kind of loaded in itself, but
Yeah,
leave it open
Dennis,
ended.
close your ears. Don't tell anybody. I love cloud native solutions. I think that the cloud providers have come up with some fantastic services out there. However, what I do see is a lot of customers really like to have that cloud agnostic tooling, and I totally get it. There's not going to, well, I take that back. There are some cloud tools that are out there that are kind of cloud agnostic. I think Microsoft has one or two that'll actually look at other cloud out there. But for the most part, your cloud native tools are just going to focus on that particular cloud vendor. So your GCP tools are going to laser focus on GCP. Your AWS tools are going to laser focus on AWS. Your Azure tools are going to focus on Azure. But it's very popular right now to have some kind of a cloud agnostic tool for compliance, for checking resources for compliance. Palo Alto Prisma Cloud does really great stuff, and they've actually integrated quite a bit of threat detection in their platform to where some might say that they're starting to creep into the SIM market, and so you're seeing this transition of a lot of these tools, these that start to embed some of the stuff that we look at our SIM for.
Really great point. Thinking about organizations that are heading towards or already in a multi-cloud strategy, that if kind of sitting with some of those native tools, mileage may vary on
Yeah.
applicability across the different cloud environments. So looking at that, the domains themselves, would you consider those, the phishing, web ads, endpoint protection, and so on, would you consider those equally weighted across those, or is there some weighting that organizations should be looking at?
Well, so my answer, no. You want to look at each one of these equally. but if you look at it from the standpoint of how that um, attack is actually born and executed, um, we all know phishing is huge, right? How I've literally, I'm not even lying, I'm not even really embellishing. I actually have had an end user that I've had to coach a few times in a past life look at me and total deadpan, not even joking. How am I going to know if I won if I don't click on the link in the email? And this is serious. Like people just they're click happy. They want to open every attachment. They want to click on everything. And so that education awareness is so key, and so so is all these other things like fish testing and automated training and stuff like that, so that you can really get some of those remedial trainings done right away as quickly as possible. So I mean, I guess if I were to throw one out there, that's just up front. When we're talking about social engineering, the biggest weakness we have in our entire network is people. So I would go there if I were to put my thumb on one of them.
That is perfect. Yeah, and I think we could all sit around and share phishing stories. There's always some good stories that come out of that on who clicked what and why.
But hey, I know that I've gone over probably 5-6 minutes, and I want to be fair to the folks at American Axle who have a wonderful presentation for y'all. So you have my contact information. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity for me to come speak with you. Please feel free to reach out. Look forward to chatting with you all in the future. I'll turn it over to American Axle. Thank you.
All right. I'll start introducing the team. Well, I think they're going to get the slide deck presented. So I'm Joe Murray. I'm a leader for IT architecture at American Axle. I started here about 3 years ago, and we started evaluating our public cloud options at that time. So we did the fun part, going through the Gartner reviews, evaluations, and putting together scorecards to pick out our future hosting platform. Ultimately, we settled on AWS, which is what the team's going to present a part of that today, the security aspect of it. It was, again, that was what we knew at the time. They also gave us the most stickers. I think we all had stickers on our laptop. Once you put the sticker on the laptop, you can't go back from there. So as in the beginning, certainly it's fun to go out there, build out this platform. We had a couple applications that we targeted first, certainly not our most critical apps, but apps that needed to be out there for resiliency, or for like our data warehouses needed more access to storage. So there was a demand to get it moving rather quickly. This is like 2018, so we came in a little bit later than other companies, so we had a chance to build it out with a multi-account approach, and specifically using at the time Landing Zone, which was just coming out of that around that time. So it helped us as part of our strategy is as we build out applications, we're putting them in individual accounts, and it was easier to manage and secure. But of course, that comes with its own challenges. Now we have multiple accounts. We're trying to manage the security access, get all the logs, everything that Liam had in one of his slides talking about challenges of monitoring this environment. Well, we recently moved at the control tower, and that's what the team is going to show you today, is how we're using that. Now that we're 3 years into this, we're hosting critical applications. How are we using these tools to make sure that we have a secure environment? So I want to introduce the team. They got the deck running. Eric Christensen's the leader for our cloud engineering team. And then John Deeby is our lead cloud engineer, who's going to go through the presentation. There's a couple other team members out there. I see Billy Zegray had a big part in building out this foundation. He can help answer some questions. He's setting the record for our team in AWS certs. So he's going for the full suite, but very impressive part of this is learning. We built our own, upskilled on our own, learn the cloud, with the help of some of our vendors like Ahead and with AWS itself. So we're proud to show you what we've accomplished, and hopefully generate some ideas, and hopefully your questions help generate ideas on our side. So I'll turn it over to Eric now. Eric, can you go through your intro?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Dennis and Liam for your support and joining us on this presentation. Yeah, kind of mirroring what Joe said, working heavily with our partners. We touched on almost every one of those slides. One of those slides was pertinent to our journey here. I really just kind of want to talk a couple of minutes. I want to give the maximum amount of time for John. As Joe was saying, John and Billy really are the leaders in this space and really helped us deploy these foundations and got us where we are today. So I just really want to talk a little bit about our foundations and what kind of guides us in what we do and how that leads into Control Tower and some of the things that we can control in Control Tower. So everything that we do in the cloud, in AWS in this instance, but also as we move along and go to a multi-cloud platform, are driven by these 5 principles here, and we've shared this with our executive team. Those principles being operational excellence, security, reliability, performance, scalability, and then cost optimization. So from the operational excellence, Joe talked about it with Billy here, but we afford our cloud engineers and all of our resources training time, whether that be certification or learning on their own, because the only way to be aware of new services and new offerings from AWS is to spend the time, learn them, and get educated and become operationally excellent in those services. And then those would then drive the rest of our principles. So additionally, we do everything as code. Everything we try to do is infrastructure as code. We try to limit the amount of manual setups, again, to limit drift or try to standardize on everything that we deploy service-wise. Security-wise, this, being the topic of the discussion today, this is obviously in all parts of everything we deploy. We partner very closely with Eric and Pat and the security team, and work very closely with that team. For example, recent app modernizations, we partner with our security team as well as our other vendors to help us make sure we are following best practices, and then we are as secure as we think we are, and the practices we're following do lend us a good security boundary, and incorporate that into everything we deploy. Reliability, we, again, with infrastructure as code, we test as much as we can automatically. Resources we deploy are scaled horizontally. We can, and highly available across regions or availability zones. And we try to manage that change with automation. Any scale out or anything that may drift from that center, we can kind of bring back. Performance, efficiency, scalability. We want to, as Joe said, we are a global company. We are globally deployed. We need to be able to scale out and respond to the business needs as quickly as we can. And in fact, we see that as almost a competitive advantage. So again, using serverless infrastructure, automated deployments, CloudFormation, even some other third-party tools, we achieve that way. And then finally, cost optimization. Move everything to a consumption model, which our finance team absolutely loves, as well as our application teams. We can show them, what a true ROI on a new either an app modernization or an app migration may bring to them. And then also just getting out of that data center business. That also, pros and cons on the security front. We lose a little bit from control, but we also have more control in other areas, but then also eliminate some of that technical debt or some of that responsibility. So, and then the underlying principle of all of these pillars is automation for everything. As we see when John gets into his slides, this automation gives us the capability to remain central to that standard or pattern we deploy. It allows, again, to scale quickly and then follow security guidelines and best practices. So creating a good foundation, one of the things that we do as kind of an architecture side is we create patterns for everything we deploy. In this case, in this example, this is our serverless application pattern. As we consult with our application teams and they look to move an application into the public cloud, this is the pattern we deploy. We settle on a technology, we settle on from the compute application interface side, storage. That becomes our pattern. From that pattern, as John will show, we can create policies that lock things into that. So we don't have an instance where a rogue engineer deploys into a different region or deploys a different type of container platform. We can monitor that, and not only monitor that, but roll that back or prevent it in the first place. And then again, part of this pattern, again, part of our guiding principle, security is the layer throughout every single piece of this. Aggregation of those logs, alerting, management of secrets and certificates. And so to kind of lead into John's part of the presentation, give him a good segue, we needed a way to have centralized visibility and control of each one of these type of patterns as they're deployed. And as Joe mentioned, we are multiple AWS accounts, multiple regions globally, and Control Tower is the platform that allows us to do that. So with that, I'd like to, John, if you want to queue up, or I can run the slides through for you. I'd like to turn it over to John, give him the maximum amount of time to go through Control Tower, what it took to get us to deploy to Control Tower. As Joe mentioned, we started originally with landing zone or landing zones, and saw the benefit and that need to move to Control Tower. And so John will kind of go through what it took us to get there, some of the requirements for that, and then some of the hurdles we met along the way.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And thank you for everyone for the opportunity to present today. Some of the things that we think are pretty awesome in what we're doing, and being able to showcase that to everybody, something that we definitely want to do and we like doing. So thank you for that opportunity. Eric, if you'd like, you can advance. It'll just let you run that one. Thank you. So to just like Eric was segueing into what we're talking about now, yeah, there was a lot of requirements from the business, sitting down and brainstorming the things that are nice to haves, must haves, and should haves kind of thing. We were able to, as Eric said, develop a pattern and a standard around what we needed to do, and what we were trying to adhere to in the public cloud space. So we'll talk about a few different technologies, Control Tower, a few pieces of Control Tower that are required and that we leveraged, and then AWS organizations is what we'll start on. Everything in AWS is a service. All these services, become stacked together to facilitate an overall application stack or a service stack that you would use. So for us, AWS Organizations was the account management service that lets you consolidate multiple accounts into an organization that you can create and centrally manage. So with AWS Organizations, you can create member accounts, invite existing accounts that are already out there. You can organize those into groups. So when I walked in, we had multiple departmental AWS organizational accounts. We had different lines of business that had spun up their own AWS accounts, and were doing their own thing in there. So really needed to pull back the reins and make sure that everything was adhering to these policies that we were looking to put in place. So AWS Organizations was the foundational portion of that allowed us to, again, bring everything under the control of one master or payee account from an organization's perspective, simplify that billing, allow us to do different things around that. So the first part we'll talk about within AWS Organizations is some of their integrated services. So you can go forward to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my own stuff and not your stuff. So actually, if you, sorry, go back one slide here. So some of the AWS integrated services that are out there, they're not all required for use with Control Tower. There are some that are and some that aren't. Um, from an automation perspective, those cloud formations are going to be, something that you'll want. We heard, Liam talk about things like config to make sure that in different regions and in all these accounts that you're standardizing the things that you're putting out there. Cloud Trail to kind of aggregate all that data between all these accounts and be able to have a single place to look at it. Directory services, if you plan to run Microsoft workloads out there in AWS, and definitely going to be something that you need. The single sign-on piece will be one that we touch on right after this, and then system manager and resource tagging policies. These are all things that you enable from the organization level so that you can have that central management over those services. Um, so we'll go on to the next one. For us, we're in Azure. We're in Azure AD. We have an on-prem Active Directory environment that syncs to our Azure AD environment, and all of our users use that Microsoft single sign-on console to log into our enterprise federated apps. So it only made sense to do the same thing with AWS, and with AWS SSO with organizations on top of that, we were able to give the users the same experience that they have today when logging into other enterprise single sign-on apps. So it's in the same place. They already have the link. They're going there. They're logging in. The checkbox that really helped us here was we already require MFA for our Microsoft Azure login. So being able to federate with Microsoft Azure or with Azure AD to federate the user's access into AWS already gave us the MFA piece that we were looking for there. On top of that, we don't give named users IAM access to the console. So no users have like direct IAM user access. That's all done with their AWS SSO account, or we may have some service accounts that are out there that have API access only or command line access only. So really taking that piece away, that's that enforcing the MFA at the council login, we were able to remediate that with moving that federation to Azure. And now when our users are disabled on-prem and that's synced to Azure AD, they lose their access into AWS. It's one less place to have to go to have to worry about, does this user have access into yet another application? We have some backend streamlined process to where, we don't really have to worry about creating or disabling users. There's independent processes that do that. So this helps to our end game of automating everything as well. We federate a group that's provisioned on-prem to have access into AD, and then through AWS SSO, we give them access to virtual desktops, applications, or AWS environments through the console access in general. The next thing we'll talk about is the AWS organization units. I like to draw a lot of parallels that I can between things that we may work with today. So for me, Active Directory is what I think of when I'm thinking of AWS organizations. The ADUC model where you have your domain and then all of your organizational groups underneath that. This is the same kind of principles that you'll take when you're developing your organizational model in AWS organizations. You may do it by department, by line of business, by specific needs, however you choose to break that up in a way that's useful and to your line of business or to your business in general. You can have enrolled accounts inside of your AWS organizations or unenrolled accounts. So you can just assume the payee responsibility of other accounts without adhering them to different policies that you may have within different organization OUs. But yeah, you can move things in and out of here and nest them within each other and put certain policies on those OUs that would directly affect the accounts that are inside of them. So the last thing we'll talk about with this is just there's some policies that go around with AWS organizations, service control policies being one of them. Excuse me, service control policies are like the group policies in Active Directory. So we apply service control policies to OUs within AWS organizations to provide certain requirements be met around them, whether we're only allowing access to certain regions or to certain resources, or blocking access to public interfaces, or not allowing access to public buckets and things like that. We would do those layering on service control policies into individual uh, organizational units or just to specific accounts. Another one that is good is this artificial intelligence service opt-out policy. So from a master account level, I can ensure that all of our machine learning data that we're developing and we're doing AI and things off of is actually just our information, and we're not sharing that with the vendor. Um, so if we decide that we need that support to maybe troubleshoot an issue that we're having internally, we can go in from the master account, if you will, and allow that account to have that artificial intelligence scanning happening if that's a requirement from them, from AWS in this that we're talking about right now. But anything that we're generating on that platform should be our data, and we didn't want to share it. So we're doing that with the opt-out policy from the master account. You can derive standards around backups and tagging from the backup and tagging policy. We'll just leave it pretty high level at that. You can mandate that there's different tags, or that different tags do different downstream effects. So those are both done with specific backup and tag policies, and doing that from the org level allows you to ensure that all the sub accounts are actually adhering to those policies specifically. So that really quickly touches on AWS organizations. So once you have that good foundation put together with AWS orgs, then we layered on Control Tower on top of that. Control Tower provides the easiest way to set up and govern and secure multi-cloud AWS organizations. It's called Landing Zone. With AWS Control Tower, builders can provision new AWS accounts in a few clicks, and you have the peace of mind that knowing that it's adhering to everything that's already we've been talking about at this point. So they do different things. They're going to have guardrails. All the policies that you've put in place up to that point are going to be adhered to. So the first part about a Control Tower is creating new accounts. I have a request for 70 new accounts to be created. I can come into Control Tower and through the account factory portion and create one account, create all 70 accounts at once. I can do them with or without VPCs or public VPC subnets. I can create accounts without default VPCs, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about. But we have maybe independent workflows that are going to go out and automate the build of each VPC in these accounts that we deploy. So there are times when we look to deploy VPCs, or when we look to deploy accounts without default VPCs through Control Tower. You can enable or disable regions that are able to be governed. Governed is supervised by Control Tower. So we generally allow Control Tower to go in and govern all regions that it has the ability to. And then we would layer on service control policies to block access to specific regions that we don't want workloads in. There is some nuance to that as well, as there's a specific Control Tower roles that are in your environment that you'll need to be aware of to allow that to work outside of the service control policies. So a super user, if you will, you're going to need some things to take care of that as well. But generally creating accounts, now you do it through Control Tower. There's no more going and trying to go to the council with the unique email and trying to set it up and then going into AWS organizations and then pulling that account in and saying, okay, now I own you, so that I can do central billing and make sure that you're adhering to all my standards. Once we do it through Control Tower, the subsequent steps are not needed anymore because it's provisioned within your account. It's already a portion of that master account, and you've streamlined that process. And if you get to a situation where you're going to open this up to your company to allow them to innovate and test different things, you may get requests for hundreds of environments at one time. So this will allow you to be nimble enough to create those accounts if needed. So outside of account creation, there'll also be guardrails that we'll have to put on. Guardrails are the preventative. There's two types. There's really elective and mandatory. There's going to be some guardrails that are put out across all of your accounts that are default by Control Tower. They're just going to make sure that these are built into your configs in each of those regions that you have Control Tower running in. So it'll modify the config to only allow what either the preventative or elective guardrails are mandating happens. And through the Control Tower dashboard, you're going to get great information about, hey, I have this account. It's registered with the Control Tower. It's non-compliant to your resource, your guardrails that you have put in place right now. You'll be able to dive in and see what accounts are violating and which resources are violating those things. If it's a prevention, it's going to just block it from happening. If it's detective, it's going to just show up on the dashboard that, hey, you have something that's outside of this compliance, but not necessarily stopping it. So you need to be aware of, the downstream ramifications of what could happen, so you don't inadvertently block access to maybe a production bucket that people are accessing, and bring down, access to that. So the guardrails are great. They're good to use. There are a lot of them that you can elect to put on different OUs. So I may have certain guardrails that I apply to one organizational unit that I don't apply to other ones, because maybe one bucket is allowed to have publicly facing interfaces and one isn't. Maybe one's a public website and one's an internal application server. We would have different organizational units with different group service control policies on top of them to facilitate that. So really, outside of guardrails, there's one other piece. There's the service catalog that's going to get configured for Control Tower when you first set it up. We've gone ahead and branded our service catalog for the AAM logo, and to make it all feel warm and cuddly. It's the same colors and things that we're used to. So you'll have a portfolio that's inside of this. This is where your Control Tower product itself will be provisioned. And when you need to make changes to your AWS organization by moving things maybe from one OU to another, or terminating an account, or doing different administrative tasks, you do that through the provisioned products inside of the service catalog. There's a unique term that AWS used for accounts that have been manipulated outside of the service catalog or outside of Control Tower. Those accounts are marked as tainted. So those basically say there was a superseding factor that isn't allowing me to make sure that this account is following all of the standards that you've put in place. So where you see that information will be through the provision products tab here, and their status will go to tainted. So this would happen, like I said, if you're moving accounts through AWS organizations and outside of the Control Tower application itself. So again, this allows you to see all the accounts that you have provisioned. They're either owned by Account Factory, or they're ones that you've brought into your account and then supervised through Control Tower. This is your single pane of glass to see and update those accounts if needed, or really when you look to terminate the accounts, this is the place that you really be doing that. It'll give you updates on the provision stacks. So everything comes down to a cloud formation script. So you're kicking these things off in Control Tower. The service catalog is doing the work and telling it where to go, and then it's calling different cloud formation scripts within each of those accounts to make sure that they align with the baselines and standards that you've provisioned within Control Tower and your service control policies through the AWS config. Now, I know there was a lot of information there. We really high level skimmed over a lot of things. We could go in depth into any one of those things. But I'd like to open it up if anybody has any questions around that, around anything that we've been doing. I'll try to answer anything that I can, you know, and that's our adventure of where we've been so far and how we've been able to, you know, go through the trenches in AWS and allow the company to get in and still provide the security that internally our different departments are mandating from us.
Just like everybody else, we plan to use more of it, move everything as much as possible into the cloud. So yeah, we think we're right now, if we still follow some of the Gartner, well, we follow Gartner. We're probably at a maturity level 2 going on to 3, with a multi-cloud approach coming soon. But just getting that governance down and being able to freely deploy applications out there, I think we're to that point now. But,
yeah, I mean, we've even been able to get to a point where now with the AWS tagging standards that we have in place, it's really the first time we've been able to do IoT showback or chargeback to different lines of businesses on a regular basis and help them forecast their budgets for years to come, at least the next year, as far as what they've been spending, what they're looking to move. We can help showcase that for them and give them dashboards and emails that say, hey, here's your spend. And really streamline that because of the standards that we put in place when we were building out these environments.
Here's the first question. It looks like is about the Control Tower. For those who are not familiar with AWS, that is actually that's an AWS technology that they released. John, when did they release that? That was middle of last year.
I believe it was at least a year ago at this point. I can tell you in 1 second.
So relatively new. It came out, I think, in 2020, but
2018.
Well, landing zone came out in 2018. The Control Tower version.
It was late in 2019. I think it was June or July, somewhere around there. And they've made a lot of changes to it since then, but essentially it was to codify the landing zone practices, at least a bunch of them, so that it was easy for push button solution to put in place. But essentially, it's a landing zone, and you'll see landing zone in pretty much all of the cloud providers. That's what it is.
Yeah. And again, that was easier for us to implement it just because we started with that. Some other companies, the one I came from, it built out their cloud without that. And then try to retrofit that with your current accounts. That gets a little difficult, but that was the challenge here, was to get even migrating from the older landing zone version to this new Control Tower. Took a lot of coordination.
Yeah, basically standing up those parallel environments and swinging over those accounts and ensuring that none of these guardrails or SCPs wouldn't have adverse effects on production workloads is really, the portion of that was that took some time.
I like this other question that came through is what percentage. So we are 3 years into this cloud. We are now a cloud first. So any new apps are going out there. But just like everybody else, we have a good mix of on-prem technology as well. So I would put it at we're probably about 25.
That's what I was going to say. About 25%. And working currently with partners like Ahead in this case on our migration strategy, moving from our private cloud to the public cloud.
Yeah, but we want to eventually get there 100%, just like everybody else. It'll take a few years. The key is if we're building anything new now, we can do that. Build it out, new plants. Those go straight into the cloud now. So it's really helped there.
Yeah. It's like we got another question. What were some of the challenges we faced when first starting to migration to the cloud, and how did you overcome them? A couple jump to mind for me. One is working with the application owners to define and understand the application, whether that is truly an app that's a good candidate for the cloud, and then what work it will take to get it to the cloud. And then another one that I'm sure other people have heard is some skepticism of the cloud, right? If we put it in the cloud, what happens, and who's going to support it, and is performance going to be okay? It's in the cloud. What happens if we lose internet access? So we had to design around those redundancy from our remote sites, as well as direct connectivity to AWS to kind of alleviate some concerns. And then as far as application migrations and working with the app teams, discovery of the app, which has actually been I guess relatively recently made that migration to our private cloud. So some of that app discovery is done during that phase, so we're able to leverage it. But then right now, kind of the evaluation is what can we move to a native service? What can we move to a serverless platform? So getting away from that traditional stack for an application. That's where we are now.
Yeah, one thing I'll also emphasize is that fear of change. That's the skepticism America's saying is that's especially true in a manufacturing company, right? They're used to on-prem technology they can see, that was a point of building out our cloud engineering team, is to be that center of excellence, to build that trust with our application teams who are traditional manufacturing technologists. And the most exciting thing is now to see them want to go to the cloud. We're putting one out there this year where it's a manufacturing maintenance app that's going to go into the cloud from a team that has done nothing but traditional on-prem technology, and they're excited to get there. In fact, pulling me into an office today, just they got their own PDF of the AWS environment, asked me about VPC and CloudFront. It's just people get excited when you start bringing up the possibilities of the technology out there. Okay, we had a few more questions. I might have lost track here. There was one about guardrails in particular. That might be a good one.
Yeah, this one here, we see, do you operate a test sandbox AWS environment versus AWS production environments, and are security guardrails established from control tower uniform across all of those? And the answer is yes. We actually have multiple AWS production environments. We have multiple AWS dev environments, and so on. We have some environments that have only connectivity on-prem through VPN and through their VPC, and then we have some that have no connectivity back on-prem. So those are all in their own organizational units throughout AWS orgs, and they do have different guardrails in place. There's a standard set of guardrails that are in place across the entire environment, but there are unique guardrails in place across different organizational units, as well as different service control policies that we've layered on top of that as well. Another question was any challenges in setting up a secure environment that is compliant? And I'd say the biggest challenge is just defining what compliance is, and what those environments are going to do would probably be the biggest challenge in that. If we have standard and uniformity, it's easier to automate around that standard. And if you don't have that, then it becomes a lot harder to deal with. So on the front end, working with the business to define what those things are is the biggest challenge. to being
So working
successful.
with their CISO, so Eric Willie's our CISO, helps define some of those standards, or his team does. But that's another a difficult part is that this is new technology. That we're being asked to stand up. We got to master it. Our security team has to master it, and then we have to make sure that we're configuring these applications properly so that we're not exposing any security holes. That is one of the reasons why people are afraid of this change. It's not something that we're used to.
Yeah,
But
there are a lot of tools. There are a lot of tools that the cloud providers also give you to help with compliance in general. And when you use them in conjunction with the myriad of mappings, like NIST has mappings that go between various different CSF standards to the CIS benchmarks. There's also crosswalks for like HIPAA compliance to the CIS benchmarks or CIS security controls. And there's things like Security Hub that AWS provides that will actually look at your entire environment and tell you where you're compliant, where you're not compliant, related to the CIS benchmarks for AWS.
Right. Yeah, and I will say part of what we're doing in the app modernization space is exactly that, plugging those into those published best practices and available security, vulnerability scanning, and working with our security team to, in addition to the native services, also services that we use. So to make sure we are in a line and we are secure as much as we can from both the infrastructure and the application side.
And just to reiterate, this is a piece of the entire security around AWS that's running. There's a lot of independent pieces that provide the security that we're looking for around this as well. When we're talking about AWS native services, we have a lot of those security services that are in place. We use vendor specific services that are layered on top of that as well. So it's really a multi-layered approach to security, but highlighting the control tower and organizational security standpoints is the best place to start.
And I think is to add on to that, as you look around the group that's presenting, I think security culture is a huge component of it. That if we look at security from the standpoint of it just belongs to the security team, then we're going to lose every day, right? But ingraining it, building it in, empowering individuals, other teams to think in that way is to the betterment of all of us. And certainly, I think as we approach cloud architecture and all of that, we're all still trying to at a certain level figure it out. We're retooling teams, we're relearning some of the controls. I mean, granted, some of the core tenets, as Liam mentioned, as you look at the CIS controls and some of those, do translate pretty well, but we still need to adapt them to a cloud environment. Frameworks, thinking about the cloud controls matrix from Cloud Security Alliance is also a good one to take a look at. And Juman, to your question earlier about the compliance aspect of it, and adding on to what Joe was saying, that we're cloud native. I think it affords us opportunity as we think of a cloud from a compliance standpoint. If we get the opportunity to build net new, greenfield rebuilding it allows us to build security and compliance in from the get-go rather than having to retroactively try to bolt that on. So making that shift in perspective and how we approach cloud has really afforded us a lot of agility.
Yeah, looks like that was the last of the questions.
That does
I
look
think
like
I see
it's
one more
questions.
here.
There's
But
one
we
more.
got one. This what sort of alignment you had to seek from your OGC or ISP teams about moving to the cloud? So how were we able to always be up in the cloud from a on-prem standpoint? And that's going to be something that you're going to continue to refine, right? So we were actually changing some of the standards within the company to help us facilitate the needs that we have to always have our sites connected to our AWS environments.
Yeah, luckily for us, our networking architect works very closely with our team. So buy-in in collaboration with our architects definitely helped us in that space and help us build a highly redundant but then also globally available I guess networking infrastructure pattern that allows our business partners to breathe easier, knowing that if there were a local ISP outage, we do have other ways to get to the data, and that's standardized around the globe. Depends on how you look at it, good or bad. Our security architect is always looking at that every day and coming up with some new, better way to do that. And so it's good. And again, we are all very close and kind of mirroring what Eric said. Every single one of us is security focused, especially cloud resource and cloud computing in general. It can be scary for lack of a better term, but so security focus kind of helps alleviate some of that concern and that fear. So, okay.
All right. With that, I appreciate it. Great presentation. Joe,
Yeah,
Eric,
you all.
John, great job walking through everything that we're doing at American Axle. Exciting, certainly, to give some insight into others on the journey. Certainly still a lot ahead as we continue to move that way. And, thank you for ahead also for sponsoring. At the end of the day, we can't do this without our sponsors. So Dennis and Liam, greatly appreciate you guys stepping up and joining us on this. So great job all around, and appreciate all of the great information, and hopefully, and I'm sure that everybody was able to take something away from this. Bringing the slides back up.
Yeah, I saw how you worked that pun in there. That was really good.
You like that? That was unpracticed. I'm trying, Earl. I'm trying. All right. Are the slides back up?
Yeah, we can see them. Great job.
All right. So our membership is the easiest one of all. Join us on LinkedIn. That's where we're reaching out from a messaging standpoint, where we're going next on the dates and everything. Join us there. I'd like to start more conversations within the LinkedIn group, but certainly connect with us as we continue to grow, and exciting times ahead as we bring more presentations and hopefully more organizations to the table to walk through what they're doing. From a CPE standpoint, Renew is your point person. Reach out to her, anybody that needs CPE credits, and she will circle back and get that all handled for you. And then Juman, I will hand it to you on the gift cards.
Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you guys for being there. Well, how wonderful. We already have our today's winners from the attendees. You have to be present to win. So we have Coover Shinoy, we have Zachariah Noor, and we have Kelly Shaw and Dr. Melinda Shoemaker. Congratulations for being randomly selected at this wonderful event to receive $25 Amazon card. We're very happy to have you all, and hopefully we'll have more of these giveaways for every meeting. So please make sure you attend and stay till the very end so you can win. And I'll give it back to you, Eric.
And with that, Earl, what's the next date of our next event? Do we know that offhand?
The first Tuesday of every month.
It is the first. That's right. Easy to
Tuesday
remember.
is CSA Day. It's not Taco Tuesday. It's CSA Tuesday.
So with that, appreciate everybody joining, and we will see you next event. Take care.
Thanks for showing up.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Eric, thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.